Hello, and thank you for tuning in to another episode of Know Your Neighbor, Crowsdale Village's very own original talk show. We believe that everyone has a story. Whether you live at Crowsdale Village or anywhere else in the world, you have a past that deserves to be shared. You also have a robust present, and we want to learn more about who you are in this moment, as well as what led up to this chapter of your life. And that's why we started Know Your Neighbor. Today's guest is an extremely talented artist, an all-around wonderful human being. You know her as Miss Jan Harrison. I first met Jan when she and her team were installing her artwork in the hallway leading up to the chapel. It was one of my first weeks working here at Crowsdale, and I became, one might say, obsessed with with Jan and her incredible tapestries and baskets. The art that she creates is truly breathtaking. So I have stalked her ever since and I'm so glad that I convinced her to sit down for this episode of Know Your Neighbor. So let's get to it. Jan, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. As I said, I first fell in love with your artwork before even really getting to know you. But I've enjoyed getting to know you a little better since then. I want to start by asking you the same question I've asked everyone on this interview show, which is, how are you doing? This has been one heck of a year. How are you hanging in there during 2020?
It's an interesting question, and it's according to the day you hit me. I would say most days I do very, very well. 2020 is not my favorite year. There have just been so many challenges, but I think that one thing that works for me is the fact that I do have my art or craft, if you call it craft. So I can come here into my studio and I can shut the world out and I can forget that there are problems and troubles, and I can deal with an ornery yarn that isn't doing what I want, or a piece of reed that isn't going where I want it to, and shut the entire world out. And I think that's very helpful. And most of the time I can, but you can't spend your days sitting at a loom. And so there are days when I'm down, and what I miss so much, and this goes against my personality goes against being happy with the COVID, is that I'm a people person. I enjoy chatting with Carolyn. I enjoy chatting with my neighbors. And so I miss people enormously.
It's so cliche, the expression sort of, you don't know what you have until it's gone. And I think that is such a good example of it. I would have never realized how much I valued those social relationships until I couldn't have them, or at least had to change the way they looked, with Zoom calls and things like that.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that. I think it's also interesting, you talked about having your craft, your art, to keep you busy, literally, during this time. As you said, it is very therapeutic.
It is.
To do something with your hands that takes that mindfulness aspect and maybe is a healthy distraction for a little bit.
I think that's a very good thing, a healthy distraction.
Yes.
I would imagine that there are a tremendous number of people who are finding unhealthy things to do, and that's very, very sad. No, we try to do healthy things.
I think that's a great point. And there's nothing wrong with trying to distract yourself from what all is happening right now. And I wish that my healthy distractions turned into beautiful pieces of art like yours. So, as I mentioned, Jan is an incredible artist. And if you haven't gone and seen her pieces on display between the Village Commons and Chapel, I urge you to do that before the display and exhibit wraps up. They're incredible pieces. Let's back up. What was your childhood like? Were you always interested in being creative and using your hands? What were you like as a little girl?
I was an only child for almost 10 years, and I don't remember a lot of playmates, people that came over. Certainly in those times you didn't have play dates that children do now. Family was a huge thing. My mother came from a very large family. She was one of 14. We spent a lot of time at that grandmother's when you were with family, not children. And I don't remember being encouraged to color much. I do know that my grandmother, who was the hardworking mother of that many children, loved to color in my color books. And she would get furious and upset with me if I got out of the lines. And I don't know if I did that a lot or not, but that was a funny memory I have. And I think my mother said I was a very good little girl. I did what I was told, I ate what I was told, and I didn't cause her problems. And I think probably the fact that I do off-the-wall stuff now is due to the fact that I was such a good little girl for so long, and gradually I bloomed. I think that when, even as late as when I married my poor husband, and that is almost 62 years ago, I am not the same person that he got as a wife then, because I was still behaving myself and listening to rules and coloring within the lines when I could. But when I took up weaving and basketry, it was apparent to me very quickly that I did not want to follow the rules, that I do not want the edges of my tapestries to be perfectly straight. How boring is that? Now, there are people that is the first thing they look for, is are you keeping your edges straight? That's not what I'm weaving for. And I think my childhood caused it.
I was thinking while you were saying that about coloring inside the lines, even before you said you don't do that anymore, I was thinking that's the opposite of Jan now. And
right.
You've talked about, before when you and I have chatted about your style and your aesthetic, that it's defined by not coloring in the lines,
yes,
in a sense,
it is.
and not following those rules.
Yes.
And that's so interesting that that's the opposite of how you were as a kid. Do you, feel free to not answer this, but you said even when you got married, you were still kind of that rule follower.
Yes.
Or doing things as they were expected to be done. Can you pinpoint when, why, or how that shift happened? Was it just as you got older, or did something sort of trigger that realization of following the rules is boring?
I certainly can't tell you of an event or even point to a time. I think it was much more gradual than that. But I think as I became more interested in the arts as opposed to just knitting, and I began to explore possibilities, and every time I got out of the line, the next time I got further away from the line, and it just, that kind of thing for me feeds on itself.
Yeah.
Well, if you can do this, can you go one step further?
Right.
And still have it hold together
Yes.
and be something that's usable or
Yeah.
at least admirable.
Yes, I love that. I'm thinking of the quote that you mostly see on bumper stickers that says, well-behaved women rarely make history. And it's kind of like women who color in the lines rarely make masterpieces is how I would sort of
Yes.
apply that to
Yes.
you.
There's a lot of weaving that's very concise, very precise, and very rigid, and
Right.
you have special patterns, and you must follow your pedaling, and all of that is, and I admire it in someone who is willing to take the time to do that.
Right.
But to me, there is nothing creative about it.
Right.
And I don't know why you would do it.
Yeah, I think one reason I like your art so much is because one of the many reasons I love nature and the shapes that we see occur naturally out in the world. They don't have straight lines. They
Right.
don't follow any rules. They are organic, and that's what makes them so beautiful. And I think that's a part of your art, is that it looks like it is living and breathing rather than a static basket that holds things. It resembles water more than it does reed, and I think that that's really neat.
I think that's a good description. You shouldn't see the reed, you should see the effect
Yes,
of it. You shouldn't think this is yarn.
Yes.
You should see the rhythm of the piece, the way the movement is. Yeah.
and it looks effortless. I know that's probably insulting to say to the artist. I know a lot of effort goes in, but it does have that sense of freedom
Yes.
when you look at it,
Yes.
that you're not aware of the strain that goes into creating it.
Right.
And I think that's really neat. I know a lot of effort does go into it, don't get me wrong.
Hours and hours.
Well, that's even more impressive that it does take so much effort, but looks
But looks. Yeah.
naturally.
Yeah.
So speaking of things looking naturally, does this practice, I call it, it's almost like a yoga practice,
Sure.
a practice of
Yes,
meditation,
yes.
this practice of creating, does it come naturally to you?
Yes.
Why?
And people ask me that a lot, and I have really no explanation other than I'm constantly observing details. My husband and I look at the same thing, the same TV program, a picture, and he will see the big picture, and I will see that in the background there is this, and look at this, and what do you think of that? And can you see the way that tree?
Right.
He says I'm no fun to take walks with because I'm not walking, I'm looking.
Right.
But so much of that goes in and it twirls,
Right.
and then something, all of a sudden the images form,
Yes.
and then you know how to reproduce it, or to not reproduce it, the bad choice of words. You wish to reproduce the feeling.
Yes.
Yes.
That you
Yes.
get from that
Yes.
experience.
Yes. Exactly.
And I think you sound like a lot of fun to take a walk with.
Okay, but now the rules of walking with me are you have to carry my sticks that I find on the ground.
Maybe that's why he doesn't like it. He's your pack mule. How did you start weaving and making baskets? It started in sort of an unconventional manner, right? With your daughter
Yes.
getting a loom
Yes,
first?
Yes, my daughter was given a loom by a friend, and she kept it for a long time. And she's one of these people that will just pick up anything and can make it work fine. But she didn't have time, and so she gave it to me, and I didn't have any interest in weaving, but I kept looking at it, and I said, I bet that'd be fun. And then, took a weaving course at Campbell Folk School and started in, and it took years, I would say 3 or 4 or 5, before I found what I wanted to do, because at first I listened to the people who said, this is the way it has to be. And once I have put those people behind me
Yes.
and only listen to me, then it goes pretty quickly.
When you first were learning and you were being told this is how you do
Right,
it,
yes.
and maybe you hadn't had that eureka moment yet of, no, I'm going to do it how I want to do it.
Yes.
Was it still fun, or did you feel like, maybe this isn't for me?
It wasn't much fun, no. I was interested in doing it, and as I said, I've always been a knitter. So I'm knitting and I'm thinking, and I would leave the loom for months. And when we first got one, we were spending 6 months in the mountains of Colorado in the summer, and then 6 months in the desert of New Mexico in the winter, and I only had a loom in one of those places. So 6 months I didn't weave at all. It had no basket supplies then. So it was definitely just not enough fun to pursue, but it just slowly but surely, and then once it started, then it took off.
It's hard to think of you not taking to it right away because of seeing what's happened now. As you started this sort of progression from being told how to create to making that definition for yourself, what was the reception like from other people in this community in terms of other people who weave and make baskets? Were you seen as kind of the rebel? Did they understand it? What was that like?
All of the above, and even to today, there are people who are very polite about my work.
Polite about it.
Yeah. I have a very, very close friend who I posted a picture recently of a rug, and she said, "Why, Jan, this one has pretty straight edges." She is of the old school that it should. Some people are polite, and some people walk away and don't look. That's a fun part of being at a show or having a booth somewhere, is to watch people's eyes when they pass by. And some people sweep by very quickly. They have no interest in anything of that ilk. You know, they're
Right.
looking for the gun booth down the hall,
Right.
or something else. And then there are people who think, "Oh, wow, look at that. Isn't that odd?"
Right.
And then there are people like Carolyn who come in and say, "Oh my gosh, would you look at this?"
Everyone should feel
And
like that.
everybody wants to know, where did you get the idea for that?
And what is the answer to where you find your ideas or inspiration?
And you find them in all sorts of places. I'm working right now, you can't see it, but on my work table, there's a real curled, gnarly stick, and I am experimenting. It's in the conceptual stage. I have some reed just twist tied to this stick, and I have a sail. And this came from Laurie in the chapel.
Okay.
One of my baskets that are on the ledges
Yes.
in front of the chapel. From the front has a curve and
Yes.
some beads.
Yes.
And Laurie sees it from the back because she goes in and out of the chapel.
Right.
And she said to me one day, "This is the most amazing thing from the back."
Huh.
And she said, "Look at it. It's a Viking ship, and here's the sail."
Yes.
So the basket in the living room hearth that you've seen
Yes.
has a sail.
Yes.
This basket is going to have a huge sail.
Oh, how neat.
Now, it has nothing to do with Vikings, but
Right.
it's just that this idea, and then you go one step further, and then you go one step further,
Right.
and then you're through with that.
Yes.
And you move on to your next bit of inspiration.
The inspiration for a current piece came from a unique perspective of a former piece.
Yes.
And everyone, I think especially with your art, probably sees something different.
Oh, that's the fun part.
Yes.
I read something so wise years and years ago that said when you title your pieces, don't title them like Big Red Dog,
Right.
because then that's what people are forced to
Yes,
see. But
yes.
title them like Eternity or Tuesday Morning,
Right.
and then the person can see. And that's been another fun part of watching people look at your work, what they
Yes.
say. Oh, look, this is a Viking ship.
Right.
Oh, look, this is a man with a dog. Oh,
Yes.
look, this is and it's not to me.
Right.
But it's
Right.
what you see. And if I allow you to see
Yes.
what you want in
Right.
the piece, it makes it more fun.
And people see what they're meant to see.
Of course they do. They
What
see
the-
what they bring to it.
Yes.
Yes.
And you don't want to create art that is prescriptive. This is what you should feel. This
Right.
is
Oh,
what you should
absolutely.
see.
Yes.
And I think there is a lot of art like that where it's very obvious what the intent was.
Yes. Oh, yes.
What you're
yes.
supposed to feel,
Right, yes.
what emotion is supposed to be,
Yes.
what it is evocative of. And I think it's also neat that the pieces you have out right now in the exhibit, I've had, maybe 3 or 4 favorites that I always pause a little longer at. And it's neat that I see people pausing at other
Yes.
pieces.
Yeah. When we were choosing pieces to go, first off, it's hard with the new system to see how many pieces you can put up.
Okay.
And so we took more pieces than we thought we would use. And I had a couple of people, it's like children, you don't have favorites, but yet, you think this little boy with his blonde hair is awfully cute.
Right.
So I chose the little boys with the blonde hair first. I like these. I think they're better at saying what I want to say. And then these maybe, and then these I'm not so sure. And I had done a rug during the virus when I was sitting here frantically trying to do something to keep my mind busy, something really different that I don't normally do. I used colors that are a little bit different for me, and the design was definitely not Jan.
Okay.
And I didn't know if I should put it out there because it wasn't me.
Huh.
But I took it, and we had a place for it. And when we were hanging, someone on campus came through and said very nice things and oohed and awed, and then she came back through and said, okay, I want you to see my favorite. And it was the rug that I considered not taking.
Wow.
And that tells you something.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Do you mind me asking which one it was?
Okay, it's close to the end near the gift shop.
Okay.
It has big flowery look.
Oh, I love that one. Yes, I know
Yes,
exactly
I do.
what you're talking about. Really?
But then just a couple of pieces down
Yes.
is one of my very favorite pieces.
Which one?
It's called Rotation, maybe, or
Okay.
Revolution, or
Okay.
some R word. It's sold, by the way.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And at the very bottom of it, there is a long V.
Okay.
That will be the basis of my next rug.
Really?
Of that rug,
Yeah.
I love the colors,
Okay.
the mauves and the blues.
Yes.
I think you know which one it is.
Yes, I think I do.
But at the very bottom, there's some navies and some
Yes.
beiges, and there's a long
Yes.
triangle, and I like that triangle. And my next rug is going to have that.
Oh, that'll be amazing.
Yes.
That leads to my question. You talked about kind of you sit down with different sticks or ideas in your head.
Right.
Do you have a pretty fully fleshed out idea? Like for what you were just talking about, you know exactly what you want to do with your next rug in terms of the shapes and sort of the inspiration. Does it change once you're hands-on, or do you usually have a pretty clear idea once you sit down at the loom?
Rarely do I have such a definite idea that
Okay.
I know. If I'm doing something geometric, and I don't do that a lot, but I have a few geometric pieces, and those are 8 inches this way, and
Right.
and you're using these colors and that, you just sit down and do it. There's nothing very creative about that. I don't do those a lot, but they're nice. They're plain. They fit. They serve a purpose.
Right.
Okay. But if I'm doing something Well, let me tell you how I do it. Okay, with the rug we're talking about.
Yes.
I will decide, I will look at all of this, and I will pick colors.
Colors first.
Yes, colors first. And it will probably take me a week to pick colors because I make a color puddle on the floor somewhere where the sun comes in.
Okay.
And I will 2 or 3 times a day come in and look at it and pick out one and put it back.
Okay.
And pick up another one and add it.
Okay.
Until I end up with the right colors.
The color
puddle is right.
Okay.
Now, it will probably have 3 or 4 colors that I won't eventually use.
Okay.
But it's my palette. It's
Yes.
where you start.
Yes.
And then I will start drawing pictures. Just a sketch, not
Okay.
to scale. And that may be all I draw.
Okay.
Or I may plan it in sections. I want the bottom third. And then I hit the loom, and then I look at it, and I may change my mind, and frequently that's when you fiddle with colors.
Okay.
Okay, because you're looking at it in a round ball,
Right.
and it looks this way, and if you put another color against it, you get some ideas, but until you put them linear across the piece,
And that's just one strand rather than the whole. Right.
it looks so different. So you have to be flexible.
Yes.
And to change your color puddle.
I think something really neat about your story is, and we touched on this, how this was sort of a second chapter for you in a sense. You were a teacher and you raised a family. What advice would you have for someone who maybe doesn't think of themselves as artistic or creative, or simply doesn't know where to start in trying to find what their creative passion is?
I think they should, you have to just jump into something. You can't say, well, I don't know, or wait until it strikes. You have got to try it. And if the first thing may not work, I threw pots for a long time. I was a potter, and I wasn't very good at it.
I find that hard to believe, but
I wasn't. But then I tried it, and then I discarded it, and then I went on to something else. I went into weaving in a loom, and then I went into making baskets, and who knows what I'm going to start next week.
Who knows?
At this point, I don't have room for anything else in here, but if I get the cottage next door. No, I say to them, try, and don't be discouraged, and try to only accept rules that you can work with. Listen to the rules. When I have a basket class, I was laughing working on the last basket. I was using seagrass. There will be a basket teacher who will tell you, never let seagrass get wet. The next person will say, you should soak seagrass 10 minutes like you would soak reed. The next person says, oh, just swish it a little bit. So the thing is, you have to be open, and I think being open to techniques and trying things and to listen a little bit to people but not too much.
Yes, I like that. Listen a little bit to people but not too much.
Yes.
That, I think, is the best advice I've ever heard. It can be applied to so many different aspects of life.
Absolutely can. But there are people, and perfectly nice people, who have to have rules. I know a lot of basket makers who make very conventional baskets. Beautiful techniques, incredible techniques, but they have to have a pattern.
Right.
They cannot just sit and start and make it.
Right.
They're not comfortable with that. Well, that person needs to listen to the rules and listen to the ones that apply to them.
Right.
Those rules don't apply to me.
Right.
But they do to them, and they would be horrified if they were left on their own to design a basket.
Right.
I belong on Facebook to several basket groups, and frequently the first question asked is, where did you get the pattern?
Really?
Yes,
and you can say right up here in this noggin. Well, you mentioned earlier being at shows or having a table next to someone else.
Yes.
And I think what's so neat is that you can tell this is a Jan Harrison piece.
Oh, yes.
And isn't that kind of the dream, to have a signature and such a unique aesthetic?
Yes.
That you could walk around and yours would stand out. I am just so grateful to you for taking time out of your day to sit down and talk with me. Well, thank you so much for doing this. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Know Your Neighbor. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Jan Harrison as much as I have. And again, if you haven't seen her works on display in the hallway leading up to the chapel, you want to do that as soon as possible. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week on Know Your Neighbor.